Good evening, everyone. My name is Carolyn Brown, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Development and Community Engagement at the Vassar Center for BRCA. On behalf of the Vassar Center and its Young Leadership Council, I would like to welcome you to tonight's Fireside Chat, a BRCA family fair featuring the Winn siblings. The Vassar Center's Young Leadership Council is a dynamic group of 147 men and women in 29 states, Australia, and Canada, who are volunteers and supporters of the Vassar Center, passionate about changing the options that currently exist for BRCA mutation carriers for generations to come. The opinions and experiences shared tonight are the panelists' own and do not represent those of the Vassar Center, its Young Leadership Council, or Penn Medicine. You should consult with your healthcare team should you have any questions about the specifics of your health and medical plan. Thank you to our panelists for joining us this evening to share their family's journey with hereditary cancer and a BRCA gene mutation. Dana Farengo Clark, who will be moderating our panel this evening, is a senior genetic counselor at the Vassar Center for BRCA, the McDonald Cancer Risk Evaluation Center, and the Gastrointestinal Cancer Risk Evaluation Program at the University of Pennsylvania. She has been practicing oncology genetics for more than 20 years. Dana is also the co-chair of the admissions committee for the University of Pennsylvania's master's program in genetic counseling and enjoys being a clinical instructor and supervisor. When not at work, Dana is a runner, mother, field hockey coach, and baker. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dana.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'd like to get started just by introducing our panelists, and thanks to all of you for sharing your time and your experience with the group. So we are very grateful to all of you for being with us. So we'll start, I think we're going in age order here, so correct me if I'm wrong. Catherine Winn Buckley is the oldest Winn sibling and a mother to two sons, Briggs and Bo. Catherine has navigated the emotional process of an open adoption and has experienced the highs and lows of motherhood and of marriage. She's an avid runner. She's completed 4 marathons. Catherine, along with her other siblings, published a book earlier this year about their family's BRCA journey. Love the title, Nipples Optional, a Memoir. Topics that are covered in their book are going to be the framework for our discussion this evening. So welcome, Catherine. Paul Winn is a nurse practitioner and father to 2 daughters, Nora and Bridget. He resides in Prairie Village, Kansas, and enjoys making homemade bread, pizza, and playing the bass. Welcome, Paul. Bridget Winn Stillwell is a previver, a nurse practitioner, and a mother to 2 children, Penelope and Abe. Bridget is the middle sister of the 3 Winn sisters and just 20 months younger than her older brother. She resides in Overland Park, Kansas, and enjoys running. Maureen Winn Bozen, welcome Maureen, welcome Bridget, is the youngest sibling of the Winn family, a wife and mother of 2 sons, Theodore and Charles, and a daughter, Susie. In her free time, she enjoys writing, running, and baking. So again, many thanks to all of you for A, writing your book, and then B, sharing your experiences with us this evening. Just so everybody on the webinar knows, there will be time for Q&A after our panel discussion. Questions can be typed directly into the chat, and then we'll get them towards the end so as to not interrupt everybody. So we'll ask people to save their questions and just put them in the chat as you think of them. So we will get started. So Catherine, as the oldest sibling and the first one in the family to find out the results of your genetic testing, what a journey that your mother went on. So we'd love to hear just about your mother's journey to uncovering your extensive family history with BRCA-related cancers dating back to the mid-1800s, and the process for how you and your family, especially as children, right? You guys were under 10 years old when all of this gene hunting study and research went on with Dr. Henry Lynch over in Creighton in Nebraska in 1989. So we'd love to hear kind of your take on how this all happened and your experience.
Yeah, thanks. I would be happy to give you some information on the background, and mostly we really have to give a lot of credit to our mom because she did all of this. We're just here communicating the story, but our mom had watched her great grandmother die at the age of 49 years old of some sort of cancer, assumed to be, I think it was either breast or ovarian, or chime in too if I'm missing details here. And then a few years later, she watched her own mother at the age 44 die of what they assumed to be abdomen cancer. Our mom was 14 at that time, and she had seen many other previous female relatives in her family also pass away from cancer. I think at that time, or somewhere shortly after her mother's death, she really was starting to put the picture together that there's a lot of cancer in this family. Something's maybe not right. So as my mom, grew older, got married, she vowed to have children young before the age of 30 because she thought for sure cancer was likely to happen to her. So at the age of 30, she had the four of us at that point. She actually went into her doctor and said, there's been a ton of cancer in our family. I would like to have mastectomies and reconstructive surgery. And the doctor said, you're crazy. No way. At that point, it was early mid 80s. At that point, there was no familial component or to genetic cancer, breast, ovarian cancer. So what she did is she started to research. So she went, she gathered as many family records as she possibly could find, dating back to the 1800s. And I remember her putting it all out on our dining room table, and she had every family member that she could find. They were, alive, deceased, and what they possibly had passed away from. And, way back then, there was no, you didn't know it was breast or it was ovarian, but there were mostly females that had passed away. And so she started to put the pieces of the puzzle together. At that time, a man named Dr. Henry Lynch was also studying. He thought that there might be a link in hereditary or cancer, I guess breast cancer. My mom somehow got connected with him. I'm not quite sure how, but she contacted him and she mailed him the whole family tree and said, take a look at this. At that point, he had asked my mom and her siblings to be a part of their study. And so they joined the study, they had their blood tested. A couple years later, it was 1989, we had our blood tested. I was 8, 7, 5, 2, very young. My mom that was 1989. My mom sent them all of our blood samples. At that point, still, there was nothing had been discovered. There was no mutation that had been found yet. In 1994, so 5 years later, we were all still very young. They contacted my mom and they said, it is official. We have found the gene mutation called BRCA1. So at that point, it had been found. And so at that point, we had all had sent our blood in and we had results. We were not allowed to find out those results until we turned 18. So that's really when our journeys each began individually, except I think we were a little older. So we were allowed to find them out at 21 and then at 18. And then I found mine out at 21 and they all about the same time. So that's how we got involved with Dr. Henry Lynch's study. It was our blood plus many others' blood that was used to do the research on.
Yes, I think anybody else want to comment, but I think you bring up so many good points, Catherine, in terms of just, someone had to do the work, someone had to put in the blood initially, someone had to be the first. So kudos to your mom for being so forward thinking and kind of almost like, hey, there's something going on here. So I think that's a big pill to swallow in terms of just like saying, I know there's something and I want to do something about it. Even when BRCA first started, I think saying I want surgery, that was, as you know, considered pretty radical. And people were getting psych consults and things. So I think your mom was really a trailblazer for sure.
Well, what's crazy about it is that she, at that exact same time that she was doing that research and sending this family tree in and seeing her doctors, she had cancer. And they had not known that at that point. And then she was diagnosed at age 32, which is crazy young. Yeah. So she knew. So Bridget, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, that was just the only thing is that during that entire time she was diagnosed and connected with Henry Lynch. And Henry Lynch actually said, I tried to study your family in the 70s, but nobody would respond to me. And so it was a really interesting connection.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing you bring up that we'll just make a point on here is that, you know, they had your blood, you had results, but you were not able to get them. This was all done by research. As you guys know, clinical testing was not available. And again, as you said, Catherine, 5 years later, we found BRCA1, right? So I think it's important just to point out to everybody in the audience that that was not sort of the standard of care to get blood on children, and wouldn't necessarily be done now, but it was done in a very responsible way, in that you had to be adults to obtain that information. And I think in terms of BRCA now, with clinical testing widely available, we're trying to continue that message, is that kids don't need this information. It's not going to change how we take care of them. So, you know, I think you guys can comment, but I think, you know, your mom did a great job in terms of you know, giving you guys the autonomy to decide whether you wanted to know. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to when you decided, how you made the decision of when you wanted to find out, knowing that they were sitting there your entire lives, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I can just start. I don't know. It was a simple decision. I wasn't concerned about it when I was in college. I was busy doing, you know, all the college stuff. And so at age 21, and I was almost done, it started to bother me not to know. And I think I told my parents, it was bothering more not to know than whatever the results may be. So then we just went in and we drove up to Creighton together and went and got my results at 21. So yeah. You guys want to?
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously as a man, I think I had a little less concern, but I still was curious. And I think I made the decision to find out when I think I was close to getting engaged, and I just kind of wanted to inform my future wife that this, you know, what was going on. Not that would have changed her mind, but it was just kind of more information to have.
So Bridget, you were the first one to learn that you tested positive. So again, would love to hear your journey in terms of finding out the information at 21 in the context of your mom being diagnosed so young, and then what you did to decrease your risk of developing a cancer as a result of finding out that you had the mutation.
So similarly to Catherine, I was at the point where it was bothering me more not to know than to know, because we grew up knowing that this was a possibility our entire lives. And our mom wrote a book titled Chemo and Lunch, and we all read her book. So we knew it was a possibility, and what our history was. And
oh, there we go. Okay. Okay.
Was I muted? Sorry. So I don't know where I left off. We were aware of our history. I knew I wanted to find out. And so I did find out when I was 21 that I was indeed positive. I always had a feeling I was, and I don't know if that was a self-protecting mechanism, but I always had a feeling. And I always knew what I was going to do. I always knew that prophylactic surgeries were the best option for me. It's certainly not for everybody, but I knew I wanted to decrease my risk as much as possible. And I wanted to go on my merry way with my life. I wanted to go to nursing school, and I wanted to get married and have kids. And I didn't, that wasn't, having a cancer diagnosis, if I could avoid it, wasn't really in my plans. And so we went, my parents and I kind of went on the journey to find a healthcare provider who could best support me and what I wanted to do. At that point in time, that was 17 years ago, there were no high-risk programs. In fact, a lot of the providers we talked to really didn't maybe even knew what BRCA was. And if they did know what it was, they didn't understand why I would have possibly wanted to have prophylactic surgery, the first being mastectomy. We went through a couple of providers and eventually landed on a breast surgeon here in Kansas City, who, the moment we sat down with her, she said, absolutely, let's get your surgery on the schedule. That kind of scared me, but I tried surveillance for about a year and just kept having false positives. And so ended up having the surgery when I was 22, the mastectomy and reconstruction, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Never thought twice about it or look back.
So really interesting. Patients will say often, you know, what do you think? What do you think? I haven't been through the process, but all I can say is that I've yet to talk to someone who has said, I regretted that, just because of, as you described, sort of this mental freedom, this kind of, you know, I have this, but it's not going to have me kind of attitude. And that's what we hear time and time again. So yeah. So all three girls, Paul, we'll get to you next. You all discuss the process of, in the book, of finding doctors you trust and how important it is to set up a team, just in the context of cancer screenings, prophylactic surgeries, reproductive decision making. So what would you give any advice to people in terms of finding a doctor to help you kind of navigate this, understanding your surgical options, and again, understanding that your experience was a bit of time ago, so it may be different than what's available now.
You want to go?
Yeah, I mean, my process in finding providers was basically just to use whoever Bridget used. I kind of felt, I fell in line a couple years behind her, and she found out her results and then had surgery. So then I found out my results and had the surgery similarly with the same provider or surgeon. I think it's really hard when you're talking to a provider and making these decisions. It's hard to know what to ask. It's hard to know, what the right next steps are. But I think the best thing you can do is just to find somebody who you feel comfortable with and not being afraid to sound crazy. And you don't want a provider who makes you feel crazy. You need to be able to ask questions and feel confident in the decisions. You need to find a provider who lets you advocate for yourself and kind of holds your hand as you do that. I think that's how you get to making the best decisions for yourself.
Absolutely. And I think just when we started going through the first couple doctors that I spoke with, who we weren't on the same page. And I think I would always encourage somebody to get multiple opinions, no matter really what you're facing. I think it's always good to seek out opinions and options. And like I said, when I met my breast surgeon, it was just instant. We connected. She knew what I wanted. I knew how much she supported that decision. And so that was really reassuring. You never want to feel like you're talked in or out of something as a patient.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think we tell people too, these mutations are unique in that you are seeking a surgery. There's not a cancer there in multiple people. You're an unaffected person who's seeking a surgery. So as you said, Bridget, you have time to talk to 1, 2, 3 teams. You can schedule it when you kind of want to. So I try to say to patients, you are not a ticking time bomb. You have time to breathe, think about it, ask questions, get multiple opinions. Did you guys feel like there was a time crunch, or did you feel like you had the I don't want to say luxury, but the ability to kind of take your time and not dive in immediately and really be comfortable with the process?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. I never was able to put that into words. That's exactly how it felt. Like, we have time here to think about this and feel out what's best for us. I think you felt the same way too.
Yeah, great. So then just in terms of following this surgical discussion, Bridget, if you can speak, and then Maureen, you guys both chose different surgeries. And I know when we talk to our BRCA carriers, we kind of tell them this is what your plastic surgeon will talk to you about, because as everybody on the call probably knows, there's so many different surgical options, what's considered safe, what's considered okay for a BRCA carrier versus a cancer patient. So Bridget and Maureen, if you can speak to the type of surgery you had. I know, Bridget, you opted for expanders, and then Maureen, you had nipple sparing direct to implant. So if you guys can just talk about what kind of helped you make that decision of what you wanted to do, and if there was something specific that the plastic surgeon said that helped make that decision.
Yeah, so we had the same breast surgeon, but we had different plastic surgeons for the reconstruction. So what I just said about talking to multiple doctors, I didn't do that with a plastic surgeon, but I really, at the moment I met him, I was totally comfortable with him. He completely supported. He never asked, why are you doing this? And that was his way that, he did these types of surgeries, was with expanders. Certainly chose not to keep my nipples, and that was where the title of our book came from. Nipples optional. They were optional. I opted out of it. And I had great success. I had no complications. I was really happy with my surgery. And then when Maureen was looking for a surgeon, I think she was looking for a little bit something different where you didn't have to have the 2 surgeries, because mine was 2 separate surgeries. So
yeah. So I did have the luxury of watching Bridget go through that process. And I remember going to your follow-up appointment, and she had rippling along her chest wall. And I was like, well, I don't want that. So I started talking to other providers.
I just said had no complications. It wasn't a complication. It was a cosmetic. It looks fine.
It looks fine. That's right. So I did go with a different doctor, and the reason I had chose the immediate reconstruction was purely based on convenience. I lived in Chicago at the time, although I had my surgery in Kansas City where my family was, so I could recover there. So I didn't have time to have 2 different surgeries. And I don't think the immediate reconstruction is available to everybody. And my provider at the time even said, you might wake up with expanders. I might not be able to do the surgery. So I didn't really know what I was walking into. Thankfully, I woke up and did have the immediate reconstruction, which just made that recovery process just a little bit easier. I think because I was younger, it may have been a little bit easier. My skin may have stretched a little easier. I'm not sure the exact complications of it, but it was still easy, still a seamless process and recovery, and yeah, really happy with the results.
I think it's important just to highlight too that, you know, there's a surgery for everyone. You know, you may have your heart set on one that you read about somewhere, and then you go to the plastic surgeon and they say, you're not eligible for that for X, Y, or Z reason. So I think as you guys have iterated, people can be happy. You know, you just have to find it. So yeah, that's great. So Paul, oh, go ahead, Maureen.
I was going to say, I went to my doctor and I said that I wanted to be a more petite. I was naturally a C, and I said I want to be an A or B, and he said I'll see what I can do. And I woke up and I was still a C, and I was pretty disappointed with it. And he said that it just didn't feel right based on the way my body was set. And so that was, I think, one of those disappointments that I just wasn't really expecting. So like you said, you can have your heart set on something, but what you end up with, I think, is probably what's best for you.
Yeah. And physically, because people ask us this all the time, obviously there's some sensation differences and things, but do you guys feel, okay? Do you feel like your body is still yours? The psychological impact of having a bilateral mastectomy, if you'll speak a little bit.
Yeah, I think our situation was a little unique because we knew very young that that was a very likely scenario for us. So I think in some ways you don't create an attachment to your current physical body, and you know that at some point you might have implants, and that's totally fine. And so psychologically that was never difficult for me. Physically, I can't do very many push-ups, but other than that,
that has nothing to do with
implant is underneath your pecs.
No. I do push-ups just fine.
Both like your sisters, yeah.
Catherine does them the best. I think, I completely agree with Maureen. When you know something's probably not yours to keep, you don't become too attached to it. I never got attached to the idea that I would breastfeed my babies. I knew that wasn't going to happen. But I also think as a woman, you do always kind of crave wanting to look like a woman, like a normal, and that's, your body isn't going to look exactly normal, but it is the best that I have, and I would choose this over anything else. And I even have friends that are like, you look great in a swimsuit. I used to look like that, and then I had kids. I don't look like that anymore. So there are some benefits, but reconstruction is fantastic. It's not perfect, and maybe someday it will be, but it's your body, and you gotta kind of accept the way it is at that point.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think setting expectations is really huge, and understanding that they're, again, like anything in life, it may not go exactly according to plan. Yeah. So Paul, a couple of questions for you. So as a male BRCA carrier in the group, is there anything special that you've done? Are there any specialists you've seen, in terms of the BRCA mutation?
Yeah, so I think I started sort of this journey in 2017, and I decided I was getting close to 40 and I should probably start being proactive. So I saw a genetic counselor in Portland, Oregon, where I lived at the time. And the first thing that we did was we repeated the test to make sure I was actually a BRCA carrier. There wasn't a lot of doubt in my mind. And this was kind of funny because this was before Maureen had her test repeated, which I'm sure we'll get to. And she repeated and she said yes. And I think part of it was just to kind of have some more documentation. Because up until that time, people had said, I told doctors and they said, well, do you have anything that says this? And I said no. And since then, I actually found a letter saying that it was. But anyway, so I went to genetic counselor, we got the test results. And then I was mostly curious about the increased risk of pancreatic cancer. And so I asked about that, and she referred me to a GI, a pancreatic specialist, and I saw a doctor there, and he said no, there's no guidelines right now, and it made sense to me, and so I didn't pursue any further workup. But the things that I've been on top of is the breast self exams, and I had prostate screening this year. The other thing I would add is that I've actually been up to date on the Vassar Cancer Center website, and I kind of recheck it, and I think that's the biggest thing for me is just sort of being up to date on what the newest screening guidelines are, and kind of I guess being proactive about that and advocating for myself.
Perfect. Yeah. And we do tell our patients, we try to see everybody once a year, just so you guys stay in the loop, and we know people are coming in once a year, so we can actually update them if things should change or ages should change and new screening becomes available, whether it's, and I think, Paul, you bring up a really nice point too about, research testing and how different it is. And we have people who say, I had research testing 20 years ago. I don't have documentation of it, so this happens in the real world. So this segues nicely, Maureen, into your story. So just to give background to everybody listening, you were initially told that you carried the BRCA1 mutation. You had a prophylactic mastectomy, and then years later, before having a hysterectomy, you went to a program who told you to repeat the test, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So like you said, I found out in my early 20s that I was positive. I attended Creighton University, which is where Dr. Lynch did his research. And so I was able to sit down with him. My parents were there, Bridget was there, and he gave me my results in person. He told me I was positive. And the first question out of my mouth when he said you're positive is there any chance this could be wrong? And his answer to me was no. I trusted Dr. Lynch. He was a great researcher. I took that as fact, and so I went ahead and had my mastectomy. Got married very young. I had 3 children, and in my early 30s, I decided that I was ready to have my ovaries taken out. Again, following suit from Bridget, decided that that was the right next step for me. And when I did that, the high-risk clinic I was going to said you need to repeat your test. Because they were research results. And when I did, the genetic counselor called me about a week later and said that I was actually negative. And, I've said it before, it was more shocking to me to find out I was negative than it was positive. And I think that's very unique to my situation. I expected to be positive. When I met with Dr. Lynch, I expected to be, just because I was raised knowing that was a very high risk. And I created that to be part of my identity. I was a pre-vivor, and that was very empowering. And I felt very confident in that decision, and I continued to advocate for myself. I felt very optimistic about my future based on the decisions I had made. And so to have that taken away in an instant was incredibly shocking. I think I felt every feeling you could ever feel all at once. I was very sad. I was very angry, but at the same time, I was relieved, because I wasn't positive and I didn't have to have my ovaries taken out, and my children wouldn't carry the gene. So there was a lot of mixed feelings there. I felt a lot of guilt that I was now negative, and Bridget and Paul continued to be positive. So it took time to work through those feelings and get some answers from Creighton. I'm still very thankful for the research that Dr. Lynch did, and Creighton is my alma mater. I continue to be proud of that fact. And I kind of just decided that I didn't need to hold on to that anger that I had. It wasn't benefiting me. I was, again, still very thankful, happy with my mastectomy results, and happy I didn't have to have my ovaries out. I understood that I had participated in research. I wish I would have understood that a little earlier than I did. So it was, an unfortunate consequence of the research. I continue to trust genetic testing. I've done more genetic testing in my life than I ever, thought I would. I think I've used every company and probably done it 5 or 6 times just to really make sure that I'm done.
That is a true statement.
So if any of my kids show up positive, then I'll have more questions.
A whole nother issue.
Yeah. But even with knowing what I know now that I'm negative, I'm still confident in the decision I made. I don't regret my mastectomy. I did what I could at the time with the information that I had. And I felt confident then. I still feel confident. It still reduced my risks as just a woman, not having to worry about breast cancer. So knowing that risk is high for women without the gene.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Your journey is so interesting, but I think it is important to reiterate that this is highly unusual. But we always say, if a person, before they take any measure that they don't feel comfortable, if they want to make sure, retest. It's quick and easy, as you guys know. It can be done clinically. Research testing should always be confirmed in a clinical lab. We definitively tell everybody that, but if you're in a center where it was done through a research study, make sure that before any decisions are made that you test through a clinical lab. And even if it's through a clinical lab, if you have any inkling that you want to redo it, go for it. Nobody should say no to you for that.
I think what we've learned is that genetic testing as a field continues to evolve. And what we know now is, a very small piece of it. And what we knew 20 years ago was an even smaller piece of it.
Yeah.
I wish Dr. Lynch's answer to me would have been, if you have any questions, go get it retested. Unfortunately, that wasn't it. And so that's what I would say to anybody else, what you just said, just to advocate for yourself and to continue to ask questions until you feel comfortable with your answers.
Yeah, 100%. So speaking to this idea of being a true negative, so true negative meaning that your family has a known mutation and you test negative. Catherine, how do you feel like that impacts you and the way you have, kind of been there with your family, kind of going through this as at one point the only negative in the family, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've been asked that question before, and I honestly don't know that I have a great response for it, because when you grow up in a family like ours and it's so prevalent and you're just a part of it. I feel like I very much can associate with a previvor. I can talk to anybody about it. I'm not personally one, but I can speak to it. And I was in it with them the whole time. But at the same time, I have the guilt, I think, that Maureen speaks of. I won't have to worry about this. I don't have to tell my children. I mean, my children will know about this, but I don't have anybody I'm passing it on to. So there's some level of guilt with it, but our family is very tight knit, and probably tell just by us sitting here, we're together. We go through all of these things with each other. So I'm happy to be negative, but I would also just take it if I was positive. And
I think Maureen said it best. She said the BRCA mutation is a part of who I am, whether I carry it or not. And that's just kind of a testament to the way we were raised and how close we are as a family. We all kind of just go through this together. So I think that's probably how you feel.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And
Sorry.
I think the other thing too is that this is your family. So even though, Catherine, you're negative, you still watched your mom go through what she went through. And this is a collective sort of story, right? So each chapter has its own ending. But I think you all went through this, in the anxiety of being tested and finding out and making decisions and supporting each other. That's huge. So I always say to patients, if you're negative, you can, be there to drive people to doctor's appointments, and you can, find the way to support your family, because what it's like to, everybody's here for a reason. So I think, it's a powerful story no matter what the result is. So then speaking to telling, as you mentioned, Catherine, your children don't have to worry about this. So Paul and Bridget, if you can just, tell us, we get this question all the time. Have you talked to your kids, and how do you how do you bring this up? You know, and at what age do you feel like is, you know, was appropriate for your family? Because obviously every family's different.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my daughters are 9 and 6, and when we finished our book about a year ago, I think that's when I sort of had the first discussions with my older daughter, who's 9. She was just curious. She really wanted to know what we were writing about, and so we kind of did a sort of a broad discussion of it. And I think it's something that we'll kind of add to periodically over time without trying to scare them. It's sort of a difficult balance right now, but you know, I did have 2 daughters. I think this is going to be something that they're going to have to deal with down the road. I'm fortunate because they have a lot of knowledge, or we have a lot of knowledge. And in addition to that, like you said, the family is, they have so much family support, and they have aunts who've been through this so much before. So I feel really lucky about that. But it's something we've just kind of touched the surface of.
Yeah, as far as my children go, our daughter is 10 and our son is 8. And so kind of like the way we were raised, it was something I've always talked about with my daughter. And so she has read our book. And so for her, it was just kind of a continuation of our, I guess not a continuation, just more information that was added to the story and what we went through. So she certainly is aware of her risk. And for as much as a 10-year-old can understand, you know, I think we had kind of talked about, you know, we tell them that as much as they need to know for their age and what's appropriate, but absolutely she asks me from time to time, Mom, what if I'm a carrier? I say, then you are, and we will, you know, cross that bridge when we get to it, and support you through that. And she asks, well, what if I have to have surgeries? Then you do, and this is what you need to do to save your life. So, you know, having the conversation with my son might be a little bit different, but much like Paul, maybe even more important that he understands that what his risks are for his children. And so, you know, for so long, they thought men couldn't pass on these sort of female mutations. Well, gosh, not only can they pass them on, it could be so impactful to their children, so that they keep this information alive, and their spouse, and the decisions that they make together. So we'll talk to him about it, but as he can understand it.
I think the takeaway there is tell them early, make it a lived experience as part of this is your family. Some families have heart disease, some families have diabetes, our family has this. And it's just part of the fabric of who you guys are, and what amazing examples they have of survivorship and empowerment and decisions that, you know, this doesn't have to, you know, this is not at all something that has to be cried over. You know, you can shed some tears, but we can move on from this. And they have such great examples. So I think the more you talk about it, as you said, Bridget, in age appropriate language, and then add in things as they get older, it's so important. Because if you start it early, it feels like that you're not dropping a bomb. You're just kind of letting off little, you know, little bits and pieces all throughout. And then when it's time, okay, it's time, I'm kind of ready. And I feel like then the kids almost say, I'm ready now. I want to know.
Much like you there, because our mom was, I mean, it was just so important to her that we just know, you always know what lies within your DNA, whether it be heart disease or cancer or.
I should say that our mom is extremely blunt. And so
Yeah,
on the call.
she's also listening.
that's fine. She knows this. And so this was very matter of fact stuff when we were very young.
Yeah.
It demystified it and made it kind of normal to have these conversations. As a man, you know, talking about breasts, it's kind of awkward, but it's something that I was just so exposed to at a young age.
Which
Yeah.
is great.
That's a really second nature to us.
Yeah. So Bridget, just speaking of children, for people, you know, who are listening, we get a lot of questions about pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and genetic testing, and deciding whether you kind of want to know prior to having a child. So can you tell us about what you and your husband decided, and you know, why or why not?
Yeah, so we never talked about it before we decided to try to have children. We just knew that we wanted to have kids. And so we did very easily, very quickly. We had 2 kids, and then the subject wasn't really raised. It was never a question. We got what we got. You get what you get. It wasn't really raised until we experienced infertility after. So Catherine experienced infertility, and that's a big part of our book. And unfortunately, lightning struck twice in our family, and I did too. And they had their son Bo via IVF, and so we went out and consulted with the same fertility clinic as she did, and IVF was the best option they could offer us to expand our family even more. We had talked to the doctor, and then the nurse called me a couple days later and very excitedly told me that it would be so exciting to do IVF because we could do the pre-implantation genetic testing and we could throw out the positive mutation. And I know she had not intended to state it that way, but it was like, whoa, throw out my babies because they carry this mutation. To me, that just kind of made me realize that I couldn't do that. I know that's not the right decision for everybody, and I understand I understand why you would do that, but my life was not worth living because I carried the mutation or Paul's. In fact, our lives have only really been enhanced because of it. I understand there are certain genetic diseases and mutations that might be more important than this, but for us, like I said, we just knew we wanted to have kids, and we were so excited to do so. And it was never a thought in our minds that we would want to make sure they didn't carry the mutation.
Boy, language is so impactful. And I think as healthcare providers, we need to make sure, and you guys are as well, but to realize that words stick with people, boy. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, so I think just that it highly individualized. We talk to patients about it, and then kind of, nobody's pushing it for sure. But we certainly just make sure that all of our carriers know if they're of reproductive age that it's an option, and then they can kind of pursue it if they decide to. Maureen, if you mentioned in the book your anticipatory anxiety. My grandmother used to have anticipatory nausea before chemo, and then she'd get her chemo and feel okay. So, she said she was sicker before worrying about it. So people have this anxiety, it's called. So if you can tell us how you managed, your anxiety as you were going through all of this, through the testing and the surgery.
Yeah. So I didn't have a lot of anxiety at the beginning of the process when I obviously did my genetic testing very young and found out my results very young. I started to do surveillance, and similar to Bridget, had scares that I didn't think emotionally I could continue to handle. That was very anxiety provoking to experience that. And so I decided to have my surgeries. My anxiety has definitely increased with age, as it does. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's hard to directly correlate to genetic testing and the BRCA gene being in our family. However, my siblings and I joke that when something is wrong, it's either cancer or it's not to us. So if my elbow hurts, it's elbow cancer or it's nothing. So I think we can probably tie my anxiety back to just growing up with cancer and being afraid of it and being high risk. People have called us cancer phobic. And again, I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm very self-aware of my health. I advocate for my health. If something is wrong, I go and I talk to a provider about it. And I have them rule out my elbow cancer, and that it's probably something else. And so really, I think it's good. It's led me down really good paths. It's kept me healthier. And like I said, just be more aware of my body and the symptoms I'm experiencing. So in general, I don't think anxiety, it can be very helpful to you. It can bring you to better places.
I think in it, when someone has a family history or a BRCA mutation or any mutation, we always tell patients, you're never crying wolf at this point, right? If something's going on and it doesn't feel right, just come talk to us. So I think it's important for the carriers to just sort of say, you guys know your body, and I feel like women are very in tune to what's going on. Ovarian cancer is a tricky disease. So we always say, just let us know. Bridget, would you be able to give us you went through surgical menopause with the removal of your ovaries for the mutation. So if you can just give us, a little bit of your experience and what you expected and what was kind of a new surprise.
Yeah. So whenever you find out your BRCA mutation, well, at least I did, thought about the big deal was going to be the mastectomy, because that's what you can see, and that would be what the big hurdle would be. And we didn't talk really much about getting your ovaries removed, but even when I approached the point of seeing my GYN oncologist to have my ovaries removed, again, it really wasn't a big point that this might rock your world to have a sudden onset menopause. The way that my surgeon practiced was she removes ovaries, and then she liked to wait 6 weeks before starting any sort of hormone therapy. And so I went through full-blown menopause, and I tell you what, I've had 10 surgeries. I've had 2 kids. I've had 4 miscarriages. I've run 6 marathons, and I've never had a bigger insult to my body than to have a sudden cessation of hormones. So maybe it was a fault on my own to kind of overlook how important that was. Maybe I could have been better informed about what this was going to do to my body. Some women sail through menopause and they have no symptoms. I mean, our mom had her ovaries removed when she was 32, and she has stated she never felt any different before and after. I'm not that person. So yes, it rocked my world. I wish that I would have done more research on what that would have done to my body. So unfortunately, I was able to get through that and find a therapy that worked for me. It still does, but I think to patients that might be facing that, they should look at what their options are going to be and what that might look like for them, and for providers to let their patients know how much this is going to change for them.
I think in women in the postmenopausal setting, we very much sort of poo-poo, you're not going to be more menopausal. So for a postmenopausal woman, not that big of a deal, but I do think it's underestimated the impact it has. And we sort of know that, like natural menopause, some women sail through it. Other women, it's miserable and lasts what seems like forever. Surgical menopause can be the same. Some patients are like your mom, where, oh, I had a hot flash, I forgot about it. And other patients, it's just really life altering. So I think your point is a great one. Just get all the information, ask the questions. There's so much out there now that you can see, but it's one of the hottest topics here at Vassar. I think, it's just, what am I going to feel like? What's going to go on? So, talk to someone who's gone through it is another option of, and again, not everybody has the same experience, but yeah. So thanks for sharing that. So before we open for Q&A, just to hear from all of you about what motivated you to write this fantastic book, and what was it like to write it as a family?
Well, it took us over a decade to write, if that tells you anything. But
it was a story that continued to evolve. It was a story that we were living. Paul took the longest to get our chapters, so you can blame him. I think right when we were ready to publish it several years ago, my story evolved a lot. Not evolved, more like a twist. So there was a lot to share. We never really felt like there was a good ending point. We finally did. It was really fun. I think it brought us closer. We had a lot of meetings, which was great. It was a lot of talking, sharing our experiences, kind of retelling our stories and sharing kind of where the other people were when they were experiencing it. Some we remembered, some we didn't. I still cry when I read Catherine's chapters or hear the stories. It's all still very emotional, even though, like Bridget said, most of it was over a decade ago. So I'm glad we did it. Like Bridget said, our mother wrote a book, Chemo and Lunch, and so we benefited from reading her story and understanding what she went through, and hopefully our children will benefit from hearing our story.
Mm-hmm. And I think Paul's perspective is super unique because it's a male perspective, which you just hardly ever hear about that from these types of mutations. So while, we talk a lot about female issues and infertility and having our parts removed, he provides a really unique perspective. And then I think there's parts that I remember Catherine will read her part and be like, I can't believe I went through that. This is so emotional to read, because when you're going through something traumatic, you kind of block those things out a little bit.
I was going to add that I think one thing we talked about was if nobody had purchased any copies, this still would have been a great experience because it was cathartic, but it's also a great history for future generations. I'm happy that my daughters have it on hand to read someday and pass on.
Yeah, really well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking to that, we'll open it up for questions so people can put them in the chat. We have a few minutes. So Kate asks, was there ever a time when you were out of sync with each other with regard to genetic risk? My brother and I are both positive, but he doesn't seem to take it as seriously. I think that's an interesting question.
Very interesting.
Ooh, that's tough because we've always we've known for a really long time, and so I think as long as I can remember, yes, we've all been on the same page as far as what we want to do. We certainly have extended family who's not on the same page.
I was going to say
us.
we do know people in the extended family who don't want to talk about it, but we've always just been super open and super.
Because I mean that's what works for us, and that's what we're familiar with, and it's such a personal decision that you can't force somebody else into wanting to know. It's just it's just so personal. It's obviously really hard when you have a family member who doesn't want to know and they have children who they could be passing it on to. And I don't think there's a really good answer for getting them there. All you can do is live your truth and kind of be content in the decisions that you've made.
Yeah, I think it's hard, and it's amazing how families interpret things so differently, different branches of the family or siblings, or, you know, even mother or father, you know. So yeah, I think every family is obviously very unique. But you know, there's, as you said, Maureen, there's really very little way you can get the horse to the water, but there's very little way to force an adult into doing this. You know, we've tried, get your sister. We never see the sister. So, you know, again, people want it or they don't. And I find that, you know, saying, oh, she'll do it, she'll get there. Rarely, you know, if people don't do it right when they find out, I think it just kind of sits for a while, unless there's an age thing. But yeah. So another question, I am 48 years old and was diagnosed with stage 1C ovarian cancer. I'm glad to hear it was early. I did chemo and genetic testing, have BRCA1, had a prophylactic mastectomy 18 months ago. She has 4 children, 19, 17, and 14. Only the 19-year-old knows. What advice do you have for her as a mom to help the children navigate the journey?
Wow, that gives me the chills just hearing that.
Yeah.
I think something, and you guys can speak to this better than I can, but constant communication. I mean, telling those other ones, even just with little bits of knowledge, you know, maybe that's right for you, maybe it's not right for you, but like for us, I really truly believe this situation has been, it's been okay because we knew for so long. I mean, there was no surprise. We've talked to people before and they've been shocked with the news, and it was heartbreaking. For us, we've been able to digest it slowly for many years.
Good point. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the right advice or not, but
I would just always fault on being more open. just you know, speak your truth and tell people your story, and you know, go from there.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, it's not the death sentence to find out your genetic status. If anything, I've always felt very lucky. You're so lucky we know. Think about all of our ancestors before us who didn't know. They truly had targets on their back. We can remove that target, especially with something like BRCA, where you can have your breast removed, you can have your ovaries removed. There's so much you can do. We are lucky to be in a position. It is very hard to find out your genetic results. I imagine it's a million times harder to find out you have cancer. So we are lucky to be in the position we are in.
I was going to say that, like with the ancestors, you know, looking back, so many people have suffered in our family, and there's so many people died and lost their, you know, their parents, mothers at such a young age that I feel a little bit obligated to take advantage of the knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think your life can be good before and better after knowing. I mean, I think we've all continued to live perfectly normal lives, better lives than we would have. So
You have no problems.
Yeah, no, zero. We're good.
Okay, maybe you.
You guys are that family. You're the one. You're the one. We have a question for Maureen. When you were retested, I suspect Myriad was the only testing company, and it would have cost thousands of dollars, maybe less for a mutation. Now that there are many options, but at the time, would the cost have mattered to you, or did you have to pay out of pocket, or, you know, was that ever an issue?
Gosh, at the time, so when I found out I was negative, when I found out I was positive, I never thought
Right, research, yeah.
I certainly, commercial labs were not as available as they are now. Yes, I probably would have had to go through Myriad. It wasn't a question. Like I said, I took that as fact, and that was my fault. I also had a breast surgeon who didn't ask for results, and that is something that happened that I can't really harp on. Should she have? Probably, but I don't think we need to get into the legality of that. Yeah, so I should have then, since then, I've used every genetic lab. Myriad, I found, has been what I've told the most accurate, although I think at this point they're all pretty trustworthy and very, sometimes you just have to have that conversation with your genetic counselor about which one's the best one for you.
Yeah, and I think too, the accessibility of testing, because the prices have dropped so much over the last 20 years. When I started, it was $3,000, and now you can get a panel for $250. But I do think, to your point, Maureen, it's really important to talk to someone about what you're getting done. You know, we've had patients who've had testing. There's a familial mutation, and they didn't get tested for it because they were only tested for BRCA. So I think it's really important just to have a conversation with someone to make sure that you're being tested for the quote unquote right things.
Well, I think that goes into the fact that if you do have a family history and you find out you're negative, that doesn't mean your family history goes away. It's still very important to understand your family history and know that they know a lot of genes right now that cause breast cancer. They don't know all of them. They will continue to find out. So continue to get tested if you want to, and continue to encourage your family members too.
Yeah, I always say to people when there's a family history and they get a negative result, stay tuned. That's the answer to this. Stay tuned. So I think we have a really interesting question from Mindy. What do you consider was your greatest challenge through this process? Girl looks surprised.
That's a very good question.
It's a good question.
Well, I know my greatest challenge was having my ovaries removed. I mean, that was definitely my greatest challenge. Everything else is pretty seamless. I don't know. What about you guys?
Finding out I was negative was difficult. Oh gosh, that's tough. It's just, I think the psychological aspect that comes with it can be very difficult, and just how much of your identity is kind of wrapped up in your body and which is something you could see, but also your genes, which you can't, and just kind of coming to terms with that can be extremely challenging. It can be a really good thing. There's a great group of previvors who truly understand how you feel. Sometimes it can feel like you're alone, but you're really not. And I also think we're kind of on the cusp of, not a lot of people know their genetic status right now. I mean, yes, BRCA is very common, but when it comes to other things, they're not. So kind of, again, lucky or fortunate to know your genetic status. And I think that'll just continue to grow, and you will be a leader for probably other people you know in the field.
Finishing my chapter was the hardest.
Yes.
I'm very lucky that I have not had as many challenges as my sister.
Many an email sent to Paul.
Ironically, he's the best writer. So.
Yes.
Catherine?
I can't say that I have experienced a lot of challenges. I mean, outside of seeing my siblings go through a lot of ups and downs, I think that it's hard to be on the outside looking in and you can't do anything about it. But I'm sure they would argue that you've done a lot. I mean, just in working with families like yours over the years, just being there and you guys all in one room and talking and sharing, and I'm sure you've done more than you think you have. So we are just at 7:30. Carolyn, I don't know if you're jumping back on, but I can't, this was such a pleasure for me to just be a part of your worlds for an hour. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of Vassar and everybody that works in this space. It's really been a fantastic evening. There are many, many, many thank yous. Everybody has hope for their children. And so I can't thank you guys enough. People really did
learn a lot, and we couldn't get to all the questions. So, you know, again, thank you so much for sharing and being so open. And everybody, Carolyn put a link to buy your book.
Oh,
So,
great.
Awesome.
Yeah,
You.
go
Thank
grab it.